Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Do you still remember those timeless faces that once lit up Hollywood screens, only to have their glow dimmed by a single habit? In today's video, we will look back at 15 legendary stars who all shared one silent destroyer: cigarettes. From cowboys and crooners to kings and pinup queens, each of them lived in clouds of smoke that ultimately stole their breath away. Their stories are not just about fame and talent, but about the price paid for the glamour, when addiction became part of the image. Some died young, others defied time, yet all were claimed by the same invisible hand. Do you remember these stars? Which one left the biggest mark on your heart? Leave a comment below. And as we begin, take a deep breath, because the truth behind these 15 lives is hard to swallow. Number 1. John Wayne, the ultimate American cowboy, the man whose stride defined masculinity for generations. Yet behind that unshakable image of strength, his body was quietly losing its battle against a far more dangerous outlaw: tobacco. By the time Wayne was diagnosed with lung cancer in the mid-60s, he had already spent decades inhaling 5 packs a day. Doctors removed his entire left lung and several ribs, but Wayne refused to show weakness. He went back to work, filming the Green Berets in true grit as if nothing had changed. Audiences never saw the pain beneath his swagger, but friends later recalled that he could barely breathe between takes. 15 years after that first diagnosis, another cancer struck, this time in his stomach. In June of 1979, the Duke fell for the last time at UCLA Medical Center. The press described his death as the end of an era, but doctors quietly said his addiction had simply caught up with him. Even Wayne himself admitted, "I should have quit years ago." After his death, a campaign began to rename cancer as the Big C, in honor of Wayne's courage during treatment. Yet the bitter truth was that Hollywood's toughest man was undone by one of its most seductive images: the cigarette clenched between a hero's teeth. It's haunting to think how many young men copied his on-screen habits, never realizing they were copying his slow demise. Do you remember John Wayne's final public appearance? Frail but still smiling at the Oscars. That image reminds us that no legend, no matter how powerful, can outdraw mortality. What do you think, dear viewers? Was Wayne a victim of his era's image of masculinity, or simply of his own choices? Number 2. Yul Brynner was the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he conquered it. With his shaved head, piercing stare, and royal presence, he became immortal through The King and I. But even kings can fall, and Brynner's downfall came from something deceptively ordinary: cigarettes. He began smoking at the age of 12, believing that the ritual of lighting up looked sophisticated. For decades, he puffed through film sets and stage rehearsals, his deep voice curling through clouds of smoke. No one imagined that voice would one day fade to a whisper because of lung cancer. In 1983, doctors told him the disease was terminal. Brynner didn't panic. He prepared his farewell. Before his death, he recorded a message that would air posthumously on television. In it, the once mighty king looked into the camera and said with piercing calm, "Now that I'm gone, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke." When the PSA aired after his death in October 1985, millions around the world were moved to tears. It became one of the most famous anti-smoking messages in history. He died at 65 in New York, surrounded by family, his final performance being one of truth, not theater. The man who once commanded etc., etc., etc. on stage had used his final breath to command the world to stop killing itself. In the years since, public health experts have credited Yul Brynner for saving countless lives. His courage to use his own death as a warning turned him from actor to advocate, a transformation few could match. When you see those old movie posters of him dressed as a king with that defiant look, can you imagine the irony? The same man who seemed invincible was being undone by smoke all along. Do you remember seeing his anti-smoking message for the first time? Did it change the way you thought about cigarettes? Number 3. Nat King Cole. There are voices that never die, and Nat King Cole's was one of them. Smooth as silk, warm as honey, his songs wrapped around listeners like a dream. But behind that golden tone was a deadly secret. Nat was inhaling poison every day, believing it was part of his art. Cole smoked over 3 packs a day, claiming it kept his voice low and warm. For years, he was rarely seen without a cigarette between his fingers, even while rehearsing. The stage lights shimmered through the smoke, and audiences thought it was atmosphere, not a warning. By 1964, his chest began to ache. Doctors found lung cancer that had already spread beyond treatment. He was only 45. Still, Nat refused to stop performing. Even as his voice weakened, he insisted on finishing Love, the album that would become his last. Each song now sounds like a love letter from a man who knew time was slipping away. When he passed in February 1965, the world mourned the loss of a gentleman. Thousands attended his funeral in Los Angeles. Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and countless musicians bowed their heads as his coffin passed by. The news hit like a thunderclap. How could someone so full of life vanish so quickly? Doctors confirmed what his fans feared. The smoke that shaped his sound had also sealed his fate. His daughter, Natalie Cole, would later say, "He gave his voice to the world, and the smoke took it back." Even today, when Unforgettable plays, there's a melancholy under the melody. You can almost hear the rasp of cigarettes between the notes, the cost hidden behind perfection. What about you, dear viewers? When you listen to Nat King Cole's timeless songs, can you feel the fragility behind the beauty? Share your thoughts below, because behind every smooth melody, there's a story of pain that the spotlight never showed. 4. George Harrison, the quiet Beatle, the soul behind some of the band's most spiritual songs. His music spoke of peace and transcendence, but his own body was under siege from a habit he couldn't escape. For decades, Harrison was rarely seen without a cigarette. From the smoke-filled studios of Abbey Road to the serene gardens of Friar Park, it followed him like a shadow. He began smoking as a teenager in Liverpool, long before the world called him a legend. The cigarettes became part of his image, a symbol of calm rebellion. In 1997, doctors found lung cancer. He underwent treatment, and for a while, it seemed he had beaten it. But by 2001, the disease had spread to his brain. Even as his health deteriorated, Harrison remained serene. He told friends, "Everything else can wait, but the search for God cannot." Those words, whispered between breaths, carried the same depth as his lyrics. On November 29, 2001, George Harrison passed away in Los Angeles at 58. The news struck millions like a wave of silence. One of the last voices of the Beatles was gone. Olivia, his wife, held his hand as he left this world, and his son Donnie said later that his father's final moments were filled with love and light. After his death, fans gathered outside Abbey Road and Applecore, leaving flowers, candles, and guitars. Paul McCartney said, "He was my little brother. We loved him dearly, and we always will." Doctors publicly confirmed that Harrison's long-term smoking had caused his lung cancer. It was a grim reminder that even those who seek spiritual peace can't outrun physical damage. When you listen to something or Here Comes the Sun, can you hear that soft fragility? A man searching for light through the haze. 5. Peter Jennings wasn't a movie star. He was something rarer, a trusted voice in every American home. For over 4 decades, he guided the nation through triumphs and tragedies as anchor of World News Tonight. Calm, intelligent, and dignified, He was the face of truth itself. But behind the camera, Jennings was fighting a silent enemy he had invited into his life at just 11 years old: cigarettes. He smoked heavily through his early years in journalism, often lighting one after another while writing scripts or editing stories. He had quit several times, but stress always pulled him back. "I was weak," he once confessed on air, "and I knew better." In April 2005, Peter Jennings went on television to deliver news of a different kind. Looking pale but composed, he told his audience, "I have been diagnosed with lung cancer." His words hung heavy in the air. Millions watched in stunned silence. This was the man who had reported on presidents and wars, now reporting on his own mortality. He fought for 4 months, undergoing chemotherapy, still sending notes to his newsroom from the hospital. When he passed away on August 7, 2005, tributes poured in from around the world. Former colleagues broke into tears live on air. Charles Gibson said, "He was our anchor, literally and emotionally." Jennings' death reignited national conversations about smoking. ABC News even aired a special segment detailing his lifelong struggle with nicotine. Doctors confirmed that his cancer was directly linked to years of tobacco use. What makes his story so tragic is that he had already quit, but the damage had been done long before. His voice, once the symbol of reason, was silenced by something so senseless. Do you remember that night when Peter Jennings told the world about his diagnosis? Did it make you pause and think?
6. Walt Disney built dreams for the world, but he couldn't escape his own nightmare. The man who gave life to Mickey Mouse, Disneyland, and generations of joy spent his final days gasping for breath, betrayed by the cigarettes that had followed him since youth. Disney began smoking in his 20s, during his earliest days in animation. He was rarely seen without a cigarette, often holding it in his right hand while sketching with his left. Colleagues said the air in his office was constantly clouded with smoke. He believed it helped him think. No one questioned it. After all, he was Walt Disney, the visionary who made magic real. But magic couldn't save him from science. In late 1966, he was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. Surgeons removed part of his lung, yet within weeks the cancer spread aggressively. The man who had built entire worlds was trapped in a hospital bed, fading faster than anyone expected. On December 15, 1966, Walt Disney passed away, just 10 days after his 65th birthday. His death shocked the world. Disneyland closed briefly, and tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Yet behind the tears, doctors quietly pointed to the obvious cause: decades of heavy smoking. It was said that even while working on Mary Poppins and The Jungle Book, Disney was rarely without a cigarette in hand. Ironically, his company had long avoided showing smoking in family films, but in real life, their founder was dying from it. Today, Disney parks prohibit smoking almost entirely, a rule that would have made him proud, perhaps a little late. When you see that cheerful castle logo before every movie, it's easy to forget the man behind it died too young, too fast. Do you think Walt Disney would have lived long enough to build even more magic if he had quit? 7. Betty Grable. In the 1940s, no woman symbolized American beauty more vividly than Betty Grable. Her famous pinup poster, legs crossed, smile dazzling, was carried by soldiers into battle as a reminder of home and hope. She was Hollywood's golden girl, earning millions and adored by millions more. But behind that radiant image was a private addiction that would steal her breath and, eventually, her life. Betty smoked constantly. On set, backstage, in interviews, the cigarette was as much a part of her as her blonde curls. It was the era's symbol of sophistication, and no one thought twice about it. "Everybody smoked," she once shrugged during an interview. It was what stars did. By the early 1970s, the price came due. Grable began experiencing chronic coughing and fatigue. Doctors diagnosed lung cancer, already too advanced for surgery. She fought bravely but quietly, never wanting her fans to see her frailty. In July 1973, Betty Grable died in Santa Monica, just 56 years old. Her funeral drew an entire generation of Hollywood legends: Shirley Temple, Dorothy Lamour, Lana Turner, women who had once stood beside her on screen, now saying goodbye far too soon. Newspapers mourned the girl with the million-dollar legs, while doctors pointed to a more sobering truth. Decades of smoking had claimed another Hollywood icon. After her death, Betty's story became one of the earliest cautionary tales linking glamour to disease. The American Lung Association even cited her case when advocating for restrictions on tobacco advertising toward women. It's haunting to look at those old wartime posters now, the smile so bright, the pose so full of life, knowing that the same lungs that breathed hope into a generation were later consumed by smoke. Do you still remember Betty Grable's smile? Did you ever see that famous poster that once symbolized victory and beauty? Leave a comment below, because sometimes the most beautiful faces hide the darkest endings.
8. Humphrey Bogart. He was the man every actor wanted to be. Sharp suit, cold stare, cigarette in hand. Humphrey Bogart didn't just act the part of a tough guy, he lived it. From Casablanca to the Maltese Falcon, his image was inseparable from that ever-burning cigarette. But in the end, that same prop became his executioner. Bogart was known to smoke through every take, every interview, every drink. Crew members said he could light a new cigarette before the last one had even gone out. His gravelly voice, the one that made lines like, "Here's looking at you, kid," so unforgettable, was carved by years of tobacco and whiskey. For fans, it was pure charisma. For doctors, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. In 1956, he began losing weight rapidly and struggled to swallow. Tests revealed advanced cancer of the esophagus, which had already spread to his lungs. The doctors were blunt. Decades of smoking and drinking had destroyed him. He tried radiation and surgery, but his body couldn't recover. Lauren Bacall, his wife and one of Hollywood's brightest stars, never left his side. She said his spirit stayed strong, even as his body withered. On January 14, 1957, Humphrey Bogart passed away at the age of 57. The funeral drew Hollywood's biggest names: Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, Judy Garland, all standing in silence for the man who had defined cool. Bacall placed a tiny silver whistle in his coffin, engraved with the words, "If you want anything, just whistle." It was a line from the film where they fell in love. Bogart's death marked the end of Hollywood's smoke and style era. The image of a hero with a cigarette would never look the same again. What had once symbolized mystery now symbolized mortality. Do you still remember that haunting look of Bogart's, eyes half lit by smoke, lips curled around his last line? Was it art imitating life or death? 9. Julie London was the very definition of smoky elegance. With her sultry voice and cool, detached gaze, she made every lyric sound like a secret. Songs like "Cry Me a River" turned her into one of the most alluring icons of the 1950s, but the same smoke that gave her image its mystery was slowly choking her from within. Julie was known for her heavy smoking habit, as many as 3 packs a day. On stage, in photos, and even in quiet interviews, a cigarette was her constant companion. Fans called her voice velvet dipped in whiskey, but few realized that its rough texture came from nicotine scars, not style. In her later years, London began suffering from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a cruel condition that leaves its victims gasping for air. By the late 1990s, she had become frail, confined mostly to her home in Encino, California. Her final years were quiet, spent in near anonymity compared to the glamorous blaze of her youth. On October 18, 2000, Julie London died of lung cancer at the age of 74. Her death barely made headlines, overshadowed by younger stars and louder tragedies. But to those who remembered her, that soft whisper of heartbreak, that slow sway beneath the spotlight, it was the end of an era.
She embodied the sensual allure of jazz and the danger that came with it. The irony is haunting. The smoky voice that built her career was literally carved by smoke. It's as if her art and her illness were inseparable, two sides of the same tragic melody. Today, when Cry Me a River plays in an old cafe, her voice still fills the room, slow and breathless like a ghost of glamour past. 10. Jim Varney was the kind of actor who could make anyone laugh. With his rubber-faced expressions and boundless energy, he became a household name through the Ernest movies, that lovable, goofy character who stumbled through life but always found a way to win hearts. Behind that humor, however, was a man hiding a destructive addiction that would cut his life tragically short. Varney began smoking as a teenager and never stopped. Friends and co-stars said he often went through multiple packs a day, lighting one cigarette with the ember of another. It became part of his rhythm, his way to focus, to unwind. But in 1998, the laughter began to fade when he was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. At first, he refused to accept it. He continued to work, lending his voice to Slinky Dog in Pixar's Toy Story films, cracking jokes between chemotherapy sessions. His friends described him as the kind of man who'd make the nurses laugh even while hooked up to machines. But by 1999, the disease had spread too far. On February 10, 2000, Jim Varney passed away in his home in White House, Tennessee, at just 50 years old. Fans were stunned. How could someone so full of life be gone so soon? His death made headlines around the world, especially among those who had grown up with his comical Ernest character. After his passing, Toy Story 2 was dedicated to his memory, and audiences who heard his voice again felt a deep ache beneath the nostalgia. The man who had once brought joy to millions had been taken by the same thing that had claimed countless others, the slow, quiet burn of tobacco. There's something unbearably sad about comedians who make everyone else laugh while fighting their own demons. Jim Varney's smile masked years of pain and addiction, but his humor never faltered. Do you remember watching Ernest Goes to Camp or hearing Slinky Dog's cheerful lines? Did you ever imagine the man behind that voice was suffering in silence?
11. Larry King. For more than half a century, Larry King was the voice of curiosity. With his suspenders, gravelly tone, and no-nonsense style, he interviewed presidents, pop stars, and ordinary people with equal fascination. But that unmistakable voice, the one that carried through millions of late-night televisions, was shaped by smoke. King started smoking as a teenager in Brooklyn, long before he found fame. By adulthood, he was burning through 3 packs a day. He once joked that his cigarette breaks were longer than his marriages. Yet in 1987, at age 53, that habit caught up with him when he suffered a near-fatal heart attack. Doctors warned him to quit immediately. He did, but the damage had already begun. Decades later, in 2017, he was diagnosed with early-stage lung cancer. Ever candid, King spoke publicly about it, saying, "It was from smoking. I can't blame anyone but myself." Surgery removed part of his lung, and he recovered, continuing to broadcast with the same unstoppable energy. But the illness weakened him. Combined with later complications from heart disease and infection, it marked the closing act of a relentless life. When Larry King passed away in January 2021, tributes poured in from across the world. CNN called him the man who made America talk. Yet beneath the accolades lay a painful truth. The voice that had connected millions was corroded by years of tobacco. What makes his story powerful isn't just the loss, but the honesty. King never denied his past. He turned it into a warning. "If you smoke," he once said, "you're playing with death, and death doesn't bluff." It's strange to think of him now, that booming voice reduced to silence, his chair empty, but his influence alive. Do you remember staying up late to watch Larry King live? Which of his interviews stays with you the most? 12. Dean Martin, the king of cool.
the man who turned charm into an art form. Whether he was crooning under soft lights or trading jokes with Frank Sinatra, Martin exuded effortless grace. A glass in one hand, a cigarette in the other. He looked like he had life figured out. But that timeless image was an illusion, one that would slowly take his breath away. Martin smoked heavily from his earliest nightclub days, sometimes going through 2 or 3 packs a day. He believed cigarettes completed his suave persona, the easy smile behind the haze. On stage with the Rat Pack, the smoke was as much a part of the act as the laughter. Off stage, it was destroying him. By the 1990s, Martin began suffering from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema, caused by decades of smoking. His once smooth voice turned raspy, his breathing labored. The man who could fill rooms with laughter now struggled to walk across one. Friends said he tried to hide it, still showing up at parties, still cracking jokes, pretending the cool hadn't faded. In 1993, tragedy struck when his son, Dean Paul Martin, died in a plane crash. The loss broke him. He withdrew from public life, chain-smoking even more as grief consumed him. His health continued to decline until Christmas Day 1995, when Dean Martin passed away in Beverly Hills at the age of 78. Hollywood dimmed its lights in tribute. Old friends gathered, glasses raised, voices trembling. Sinatra said simply, "He was like my brother. I'll miss him forever." Martin's death became a wake-up call. The image of glamour and smoke had cost yet another legend his life. His humor, his voice, his swagger, all erased by the same cigarettes that once defined his style. When you listen to That's Amore or Ain't That a Kick in the Head, can you feel the bittersweet echo of that life? The laughter behind the cough, the song behind the silence? What do you remember most about Dean Martin? The music, the movies, or that irresistible smile? 13. George Burns was living proof that humor could keep a man alive, or at least make him forget how fragile life really is. With his ever-present cigar, sharp wit, and perfect timing, Burns made generations laugh. He lived to be 100 years old, but even that remarkable longevity couldn't disguise what doctors had long warned him about. His body had been under siege from smoke for decades. Burns began smoking cigars in his teens, back when vaudeville was the heart of entertainment. He claimed to smoke 10 to 15 a day, and I only stop when I'm asleep, he'd joke. To audiences, it became his signature, the prop that never left his hand. To doctors, it was a medical disaster in slow motion. Even as the years passed, Burns refused to quit. He said he didn't trust doctors who didn't laugh. But behind the humor, the effects of constant tobacco use took their toll. In his later years, he developed chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the same illness that had taken Dean Martin. His heart weakened, his breath grew shallow, but his jokes never stopped. When he turned 100 in January 1996, the world celebrated him as a living legend. 2 months later, on March 9th, he passed away quietly at his Beverly Hills home. Newspapers called it a peaceful farewell, yet medical reports cited heart complications and respiratory disease, both linked to lifelong smoking. Even after his death, the image of George Burns with a cigar between his fingers remained iconic, but bittersweet. The man who laughed at death eventually succumbed to the slowest killer of all, addiction disguised as style. It's fascinating to think how long he lived despite it all, a mix of luck, genetics, and sheer stubbornness. But even George Burns couldn't make the final punchline funny.
14. Ann Miller danced like lightning, fast, flawless, and untouchable. She was the queen of tap, dazzling audiences through the golden age of MGM musicals. Her heels struck the floor at 20 clicks per second, and her energy seemed endless. But behind that rhythm, another beat was ticking, the slow, steady damage of cigarette smoke that would one day silence her song. Anne began smoking early in her career, when every starlet was told that a cigarette added glamour.
The studios wanted their actresses to look sophisticated, and Miller, ambitious and eager, followed the script. Through the 1940s and 50s, she became one of Hollywood's brightest lights, starring in Easter Parade, Kiss Me Kate, and On the Town. Behind the scenes, however, she was burning through packs a day, convinced that it calmed her nerves before each performance. By the 1990s, her radiant image began to fade. The years of dancing couldn't protect her lungs. She was diagnosed with lung cancer, a blow she faced with the same discipline that once made her a star. But no matter how much she fought, her body had absorbed too much smoke for too long. On January 22, 2004, Ann Miller passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 80. The newspapers called her the last of the great tap goddesses. Fellow performers remembered her as tireless, a woman who worked through pain, heartbreak, and breathlessness to keep the magic alive. Doctors later confirmed that smoking had been a major contributor to her illness. The same industry that once sold cigarettes as sophistication had claimed another of its brightest talents. It's impossible not to feel the tragedy behind those glamorous old photos. The sparkling costumes, the wide smile, the ever-present cigarette just off camera. She gave her life to rhythm, only for her heartbeat to fade to the same slow cadence as her tap shoes. Do you remember Ann Miller's incredible dance scenes? Which of her performances still shines for you today? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because every echo of her tap is a reminder that even the brightest lights can dim behind the smoke.
15. Patrick Swayze was the embodiment of passion, the kind of star who didn't just perform, he made you feel. From Dirty Dancing to Ghost, he was strong, sensitive, and utterly unforgettable. But even a body built on discipline couldn't fight the invisible enemy he carried for decades: cigarettes. Swayze began smoking in his teens and never stopped, even as he became one of Hollywood's fittest leading men. On film sets, between takes, at home, the smoke was always there. He once admitted in an interview that he used cigarettes to deal with stress, unaware that the habit would soon take everything from him. In 2008, doctors delivered devastating news: pancreatic cancer, one of the deadliest forms of the disease. For months, tabloids speculated, but Swayze faced the truth head-on. He told People magazine, "I'm fighting it, but yeah, I still smoke. It's dumb, I know." The honesty made his struggle even more tragic. Despite the pain, he refused to give up acting. During his treatment, he filmed the TV series The Beast, often working 14-hour days while hooked to IV drips. Crew members said his courage was superhuman, but behind the strength was exhaustion that no camera could hide. In September 2009, at just 57, Patrick Swayze passed away peacefully at his Los Angeles home with his wife Lisa Nemi by his side. Hollywood mourned not just an actor, but a spirit, a man who danced, fought, and loved until his final breath. Doctors later confirmed what Swayze himself had already known. His lifelong smoking had worsened his illness, making recovery impossible. Fans around the world left flowers and candles outside the Dirty Dancing theaters and on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. When you watch him lift Jennifer Grey into the air during that iconic final dance, it's almost impossible to believe how fragile he really was beneath that perfection. Which of Patrick Swayze's performances do you remember most? Ghost, Dirty Dancing, or that last brave TV role that showed his real strength?
15 stars, 15 lives consumed by a single spark. From John Wayne's silent courage to Patrick Swayze's final fight, their stories remind us that fame cannot outshine fragility. Each of them lived under the bright lights of Hollywood, yet it was the glow of a cigarette that finally took them away. These legends made us laugh, cry, and dream. But behind their glamour lay addiction, denial, and regret. Their lives are a mirror reflecting not just their choices, but the culture that glorified smoke as sophistication. Which of these star stories moved you the most? Do you remember another Hollywood icon who paid the same price? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because their memories deserve to live longer than the haze that ended them. And if you believe these stories should never be forgotten, don't forget to subscribe to Gone But Iconic for more untold Hollywood truths.